Tonight, picking up the pieces.
There's multiple victims down inside the school. Shooter is down now as well.
A private Christian school still reeling after the latest mass shooting in America. Plus, pushing pause.
When there's an opportunity to avoid civil war through dialogue, I, as Prime Minister, am taking a time for dialogue.
In the face of massive protests, the Israeli Prime Minister puts his judicial reform plan on hold. And the recovery effort underway after devastating tornadoes in Mississippi. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. A shockwave still rippling after the latest school massacre. Good evening in Washington. I'm Jenna Browder.
And I'm John Jessup. Welcome to Faith Nation. Well, flags across the country fly at half-staff as Americans process the latest horrific school shooting that left 6 people dead, including 3 kids under 10 years old at a small Christian school in Tennessee. The Nashville Police Department released body camera footage from first responders who got to the call to the Covenant Christian School campus Monday. Police described the shooter, who was killed by officers, as a former student who identified as transgender and targeted the Christian school in an elaborately planned massacre. Now, President Biden calling on Congress to act on federal gun legislation. And in his opening prayer on the Senate floor today, Chaplain Barry Black joined those calls for action.
When babies die at a church school, it is time for us to move beyond thoughts and prayers. All that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing.
CBN News correspondent Ephraim Graham with more on what we know tonight.
The shooting unfolded Monday morning at the Covenant School, a Christian school with 200 students from preschool through 6th grade. Disturbing new images released by police show how the deadly events unfolded.
There's multiple victims down inside the school. Shooter is down now as well.
The shooter identified as Audrey Hale, a 28-year-old female who identifies as transgender. This surveillance video shows Hale driving up to the school and firing through a glass door to gain entry. The shooter was armed with 2 assault-style weapons and a pistol, seen here in new images released by police. Once inside, investigators say Hale shot and killed 6 people.
3 of those were children. 2 of them were age 9. 1 was 8, about to be 9.
The young victims are identified as Evelyn Dacus, William Kenny, and Hallie Scruggs. Scruggs is the daughter of the pastor of Covenant Presbyterian Church. The head of the school, Catherine Coons, was also killed, along with teacher Cynthia Peak and custodian Mike Hill.
We just need to embrace those that are grieving because we grieve with them.
Police say Hale fired at officers from a 2nd-story window of the school. 2 officers ran toward that gunfire, shooting and killing her just 14 minutes after the first 911 call. Overnight, investigators found more guns and evidence at Hale's home, including detailed maps, surveillance of the school, and a manifesto revealing a planned targeted attack. Still, so far, police have not revealed a motive. This deadly shooting once again bringing the debate over gun reform front and center.
This person had 2 AR-15s and a handgun. You don't need this to go hunting. You don't need that to protect your family.
Congressman Tim Burchett represents Knoxville, Tennessee, and called the shooting horrible, but says there's no need to ban assault weapons.
I don't think you're going to stop the gun violence. The common thread is you've got somebody who's mentally ill and evil.
As Nashville residents struggle to cope with the tragedy that struck their city, the community is coming together at a prayer vigil Monday night. City leaders, law enforcement, and residents alike all request continued prayer as families of the victims grieve and the investigation into the assault continues. Ephraim Graham, CBN News.
All right, thank you, Ephraim. Here with us now is Dr. Larry Taylor. He is the president of the Association of Christian Schools International. Dr. Taylor, thank you for being with us. Your reaction, first of all, on what we know so far about this most recent tragic school shooting in Nashville.
Well, like what was just stated, we are grieving. 3 9-year-olds, 3 adults left their families yesterday, and it's amazing that in a 14-minute span, everything was changed. And so we are emotionally grieving and praying for the families that have been tragically impacted by this act of violence.
Dr. Taylor, great to have you with us this evening. You know, so many people have thought and hoped their kids would be safer in a private Christian school. What do you say to the many parents tonight who are wondering, how can I safely send my kids to school?
Well, I don't think private Christian schools or churches or any faith-based organization, I don't think any one of us are immune to the inevitable violence that is just permeating our society. I do think, I think the research shows that there are fewer incidents in Christian schools, but we're not immune. We're not immune to when people who are either mentally ill and or a combination of a variety of things, when they want to carry something out, it's not 100% proof, but I know Christian schools in general, and I'm proud of our Christian schools in the United States and around the world for the safety precautions they take, both for the well-being of children and the physical safety that they integrate into their facilities.
Speaking of safety precautions, your organization, the Association of Christian Schools International, has more than 2,000 member schools in the United States. Dr. Taylor, how do you advise these schools in terms of safety?
Well, our advice starts from the root system, our accreditation. I mean, this is integrated into how we check schools out when we are accrediting them. We have ample resources and training that's provided. It's on our website, not just for ACSI schools, but for all schools, acsi.org. Our main focus is look locally to your law enforcement. That's one of the first steps, is to really have a strong partnership with law enforcement to make sure that the safety protocol that is available on the market, the technology, the cameras, the limiting the entrances and exits of a school. There's so much wisdom and so much, unfortunately, shootings that have taken place on schools that we help and assist our schools to minimize as much as possible any type of act of violence.
In this school shooting in Nashville, is it changing the way your organization thinks about school safety? And specifically, do you think every school needs an armed school safety officer?
You know, I don't think every school needs an armed officer. I think that's obviously debatable, and I'd prefer not to even get into that subject. But I do know that we have to consider and have always considered this, but we have to consider the physical safety as one of the highest priorities, unfortunately, one of the highest priorities today. And I think it begins with the well-being of a child. There are so many different things that we as educators can notice in students, even former students, and alumni that really tell us a lot about how they're doing mentally. But yeah, this is always a major emphasis. Unfortunately, the amount of shootings that have taken place has really elevated our focus on the school plant itself.
All right, Dr. Larry Taylor, President of the Association of Christian Schools International, we appreciate your time tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, the values that once defined Americans are changing. According to a new Wall Street Journal NORC poll, the priorities that help define the national character for generations, from patriotism to religious faith to having children, are receding in importance for many Americans. In the poll, only 38% of Americans said patriotism was very important, down from 70% in 1998. Only 39% said religion was very important, compared to 62% 25 years ago. And the number of Americans Americans who consider having children, community involvement, and hard work as very important, also falling in every category. And for more on this, let's bring in Aaron Zittner, reporter and editor at the Wall Street Journal. Aaron, good to have you with us this evening. So talk to us about this survey. Do any of these findings surprise you?
Well, some do and some don't. We know, you cited some of the headline numbers on religion and having children, both declining when we ask people, are those very important to you personally? And we know from other sources, look, more people say that they have no religious affiliation, church going is down, and fertility is down. So that makes sense. Some of the things that really, though, surprised us were that fall in the patriotism number and some of the other things in here, like a decline in people saying that community involvement was important. Together, these numbers just don't show a change. They really just show a radically different picture of what does and doesn't unite us as Americans.
In the time since the Wall Street Journal has been conducting and publishing these polls, Americans have lived through 9/11, the 2008 Great Recession, and most recently, of course, the deepening political divide and the COVID-19 pandemic. Aaron, how have those events changed the values of Americans, or as you just said, the picture of what's valued?
Well, all I know on that is what I can tell you from when I call people up on the phone and ask them about their responses to the poll, because I called a number of people back. And look, a lot of people think this country is broken. Elsewhere in this poll, we found record high pessimism that our children's generation will have it better than this generation. We found a record number of people saying that college, which was once considered a needed ladder into the middle class and a lifelong career, is no longer worth the money. And we found that American exceptionalism, the idea that this country is a beacon to the rest of the world and the best country on earth, has also diminished. So people just kind of think things are broken. This country is not what it was. And that's probably pulling down some of these numbers like patriotism.
Aaron, do younger Americans in particular place lower importance on these declining values?
Oh, wow. Some of that was shocking. Like when it came to having children and patriotism, something like 22 or 23% of young people, and I'm talking about adults under age 30, people 18 to 29, below a quarter of them deemed those to be very important. Some people say, hey, we're becoming like Europe, not a continent of believers in God, lower fertility rates, and all riding bicycles instead of cars. And they say that almost, half jokingly. But we also, this was pervasive. I mean, seniors also declined. In fact, the gap between the younger people and the older people didn't really change much. And seniors kind of declined in declaring these values to be very important at the same rate that younger people did.
All right, Aaron Zittner with the Wall Street Journal. Thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Thanks, Aaron.
Interesting study.
Help flowing to the victims of the massive tornado that tore through Mississippi over the weekend. When we come back, how you can take part.
Welcome back. It is a critical time in Israel, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will likely soon receive an invitation to the White House to meet with President Biden. According to the U.S. ambassador to Israel, the focus right now is getting through Ramadan, and a Washington visit may not take place for at least another month or two.
And in the wake of the protests rocking the country, Netanyahu is putting his government's judicial reform legislation on hold until after the month-long Passover recess. In a national address last night, Netanyahu talked to Israelis about the pursuit of a compromise. And as CBN's Chris Mitchell reports, some say the long assault by those opposing reform caused a deep division within the country, bordering on civil war.
In his address, Netanyahu cited King Solomon and the wisdom of splitting the baby in two, and said he wanted to avoid splitting the nation in two.
When there's an opportunity to avoid civil war through dialogue, I, as Prime Minister, am taking a time for dialogue. I give a real opportunity for a real dialogue. We insist on the need to bring about the necessary corrections in the legal system, and we're given an opportunity to achieve a broad consensus. This is a very worthy goal.
After the address, Israeli President Isaac Herzog asked Netanyahu and opposition leaders Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid to work together to find a compromise. They agreed.
We will show up at the president's residence. We will extend our hand. I call on Netanyahu to take away the threats, ultimatums, and extreme statements that keep us away from the goal. Stop everything and send relevant teams to the president's residence. We will work to strengthen democracy, improve governance, and maintain the independence of the judicial system.
The White House applauded Netanyahu's decision.
Democratic societies are strengthened by checks and balances, and fundamental changes to a democratic system should be pursued with the broadest possible base of popular support. And so that's what we're going to continue to call for.
Yet proponents of the legislation said the law was designed to bring a check and balance on what they called Israel's runaway judiciary, arguing that the judicial system has had little or no restraint on it for decades. And many saw nearly 12 weeks of street protests as an attempt not just to win the debate over judicial reform, but to topple the government with accusations of the end of democracy and a dictatorship.
I don't remember that at the time that the levels of hatred were this violent, were this supported by the media, were driven by the media.
Israeli commentator Carolyn Glick says the intense internal strife put Israel in peril in light of Israel's #1 threat in the region, Iran.
People who don't want Israel to take action against Iran, of all stripes and sizes, would want Israel to be submerged in domestic rioting and discord to make it impossible as a practical matter for the army, for the government, for our intelligence arms to concentrate and focus on the task at hand, which is taking out a sufficient percentage of Iran's nuclear capabilities to keep them off the ability to develop a nuclear arsenal.
And that was CBN's Chris Mitchell reporting. Well, relief organizations, including CBN's Operation Blessing, are on the ground in Mississippi after Friday's deadly tornado. More than 24 people died after the nearly wide-mile twister tore its path of destruction.
When we arrived in Rolling Fork, we were struck with how abrupt the path of destruction began. The houses on the outskirts of town were virtually untouched, but once you seemed to cross an invisible line, the destruction got increasingly bad, and to a point where there was only piles of debris in the center of town.
Much of the hard-hit region is poverty-stricken, and many of the victims are uninsured. As residents continue to dig out and clean up, organizations like Operation Blessing are pledging to be there as long as it takes.
And you can help Operation Blessing's disaster relief efforts by calling 800-700-7000 or by visiting ob.org. Americans consume 60 to 65 pounds of sugar a year. When we come back, a wake-up call about the damage it can do to your health. The American Diabetes Association is issuing a wake-up call over the seriousness of diabetes. On this Diabetes Alert Day, CBN News is shining a spotlight on sugar.
U.S. adults on average take in an average about 60 pounds of sugar each year, leading to a 40% obesity rate. And no surprises here, Jenna, children consume even more. Yeah. Medical reporter Lori Johnson brings us this look at how much damage sugar can do to your health.
More than 42% of adults are now obese, making it the first time the national rate has passed the 40% mark. One reason? We consume 3 times the recommended amount of sugar. Most American adults consume about 1/3 of a cup of sugar each day. Think of it. That adds up to about 60 pounds a year. This much. But guess what? Kids consume even more than grown-ups, 65 pounds a year. A lot of that comes from beverages. Kids consume 30 gallons of liquid sugar a year, enough to fill a bathtub. Fruit juices, sport and energy drinks, even tea and coffee are often loaded with sugar. This one Starbucks item contains more than 14 teaspoons of sugar, almost 2 days' worth. Candy bars make people happy without them realizing they're eating a whole day's sugar allotment.
They do feel that
that uplifting feeling for a few minutes. But the problem is these long-term effects.
Doctors say consuming too much sugar can lead to cancer, heart disease, and brain disorders.
Sugar has been shown in several research studies to worsen depression, to worsen anxiety, and associated with things like brain atrophy and dementia.
Even foods that seem healthy are often loaded with sugar, like this protein bar with 8 teaspoons. Canned peaches in syrup, 18 teaspoons. Baked beans, 22 teaspoons. In her book, Breaking Up with Sugar, Molly Carmel describes her decision to lose weight after tipping the scale at 325 pounds.
Sugar is a tricky little abuser because it really is everywhere. I gave up ketchup. I gave up teriyaki sauce. I gave up a lot of salad dressings.
This tiny jar of pasta sauce contains 5 teaspoons of sugar, and this small bottle of barbecue sauce has 54. Health experts say one of the best ways to reduce sugar intake is to avoid processed foods and cook at home from scratch. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
From storm chasing to a miraculous rescue in Mississippi. We'll have the story next on Faith Nation.
Finally tonight, a storm chaser is describing the miraculous circumstances around a family he rescued from the Mississippi tornado, and later a pledge he made to help.
Well, after initially chasing the storm, Johnny Gable headed to the hard-hit area of Rolling Fork Friday to help out. Gable, who's been chasing storms for 5 years, shifted into rescue mode after hearing calls for help. Following the path of destruction, he found an elderly woman sitting in her bed, surrounded by her demolished home. Gable helped the family out of the rubble. He calls their survival nothing short of a miracle, seeing that they suffered only scratches. When he found that they didn't have insurance, Gable started a fundraiser for the family, helping them to find a new home. Talk about Good Samaritan.
Yeah, that's amazing to see. I mean, some of these images that we're seeing out of Mississippi are just devastating. So to think about surviving that, being buried under the rubble like that woman and then surviving is incredible.
A miracle indeed. Well, that does it for this edition of Faith Nation.
Thanks for joining us. Have a great night.